Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Denisha Newby. I'm a representative at the University of Akron, and today we will go over some information about the FAFSA process and financing your students' education. So the topics that we will go over is in general, what is financial aid, information about completing the financial aid form, or also known as the FAFSA form, the free application for federal student aid, talking a bit about scholarships, where you can look for those, how to apply for them, maybe some sites that you haven't thought of, resources that you haven't thought of. Hopefully you can start that timeline. Also the timeline about when you should be receiving notification from different institutions. And also we'll talk about other resources available. This presentation is geared towards students and families of graduating seniors. So as the year before you actually start college or whatever higher education institution you're looking at, that's when that process starts. So again, this is generally the student's senior year of high school. They kind of start this process, and we'll go over some real deadlines and dates that you should be aware of. So what exactly is financial aid? And I go over this because there's different definitions. So financial aid really is any resource or tool that you use to help pay for college. So that could be scholarships that the student received. It could be federal or state grants or institutional grants that comes from the institution. And generally scholarships and grants are not paid back. It could be loans in the student's name. It could be loans in the parent's name. So all those are considered different forms of financial aid. What different financial aid offices does is we bring all those together, and we're like the umbrella. So we bring all those together to kind of help funnel, to help pay for the student's education. So every institution that you're looking at is going to come up with what's called a cost of attendance or cost of education. This is so that you can compare institutions apples to apples as far as the estimated cost. So for instance, every institution should give you an example of what their tuition is for an academic year. For a school that's a semester, like the University of Akron, there's 2 semesters, fall and spring. You might be looking at institutions who are on the quarter system, so theirs would be fall, winter, and spring. But again, they should be giving you those numbers to what to expect for an academic year. They also will give you an estimation of room and board. So let's say your student is planning on staying on campus. They're going to give you a middle of the road, generally estimation of what students pay for their residence hall and that associated meal plan. If your student chooses to commute, they're also going to come up with that number because there is gas and other expenses tied to commuting, going back and forth. Or if the student's staying off campus, they have rent and utilities and things of that nature. Those 2 costs are what we consider direct costs because generally they're billed to you by the institution. So students staying in the residence hall and the tuition and fees are billed to you by the institution. And it's normally term by term. So the indirect costs are things that you should take in consideration, but you might not necessarily receive a direct bill from the institution for those charges. So you're looking at transportation. So again, that back and forth expense, maybe card maintenance, things like that. Books and supplies. So your student would either have to go to the bookstore and pick those up. Many institutions or courses have online books. So your student actually gets the course code and can access that book electronically. There are ways for you to rent them or those different type of things. And then miscellaneous and personals, everything else. So that is toiletries, that occasional pizza off for their meal plan, things of that nature. So every institution usually presents to you the full cost of attendance or cost of education. And it's for up to you and your family to determine what parts of that cost of attendance or cost of education you need to cover. So let's say you say, oh, grandma left a fund for all of her grandkids that she's helping to pay for all of their books and supplies. So, when you're coming up with funding sources, you can take that number of books and supplies out because you have other means to cover that. So again, as you're looking at different institutions, every institution should present to you either on their website, usually in their offer letter. We're going to talk about that in a couple of slides, that estimated cost of attendance. So what's the basic process? Generally, you as a family unit, the student and their parent, and we'll talk a bit about that definition of parent, complete not only the admissions application, right, for the different institutions you're looking at, but you also complete the FAFSA form, the free application for federal student aid. When you're completing that form, you can put up to 10 schools on there at a time, and if your student has even more, they can add those on there. So that's what sends, when you fill out that FAFSA form, you're putting those schools on it, it sends it to the institution. So the institution receives the FAFSA form. We look at it and say, oh, we need additional documentation, or there's some questions or whatever. Sometimes there isn't. From there, that school processes it. And then they generally send you an offer notification. And this will detail the estimated cost, what scholarships that student received, what any grants, any federal loans, things of that nature. So that's kind of how it works in a nutshell. So basically, you have to fill out the application in the FAFSA form, have it sent to the school, however you do that. And then the school processes it and usually presents back to you that offer notification. So we spoke about the FAFSA form, the free application for federal student aid. Again, this is something that your students will start that process of their senior year of high school. You can't do it early, you can't do it as a junior. And we highly recommend as financial aid administrators that you do the FAFSA form each academic year. So the FAFSA, new FAFSA generally comes out every October 1. So October 1, a new FAFSA will come out for the 23-24 year. So think about when your student is actually sitting in the seat to attend college. So it's generally that summer or fall of 23 going into that 24 year. So you're going to complete the FAFSA form. Again, that's at studentaid.gov, and it's going to ask you some information about your family. We're going to go into that in a couple of slides. Again, you're doing the 23-24 FAFSA form, which is going to use 21 tax information. So you click apply for aid and start here. So in order to start that process, both the parent and the student need an identifier called the FSA ID. So basically it's an electronic signature so that we know that one, the information reported for you is actually your information and you've given permission. So it's your electronic signature. So both the student and the parent would need their own electronic signature or FAFSA ID number. So sometimes parents already have one because let's say you have another student who maybe is in college or went to college. Maybe you as the parent, you attended college recently and completed different applications of that nature and you already have an FSA ID. Your FSA ID is unique to you. So if you've already had one, you cannot apply to get a new one, but you can have it reset if that's something that you need to do. So both the parent and the student do need their own FSA ID, and you can request that or basically set that up again on studentaid.gov to create that FAFSA ID. So I do get a question a lot sometimes of, you know, hey, the student's on their own, they live on their own, or they're going to live on their own, or the parents aren't able to help. Does the parent need to be on the FAFSA form? In general, students have to include their parent information if they're under 24 or so, and or meet one of the other following requirements. So that's a veteran, a military veteran. They have children that they support. Both parents are deceased or married. So those are the criteria that where students would not have to include parent information. So in most cases, most students are considered a dependent student and do have to include parent information on that FAFSA form. If you have a unique circumstance, maybe you are a supporting person and not the parent's biological or adoptive, if the student's biological or adoptive parent, that I would highly suggest that you contact either the financial aid office at the University of Akron or whatever institution you're looking at to see if they have an appealable process or if they can take documents. So there are cases where parents are incarcerated or just not able to because of mental capacity or whatever that is. So maybe there's police reports or other types of documentation in place where that financial aid office can help you to do what's called a special circumstance appeal form. So when I say parent, what do I mean? Parent is considered biological or adoptive, regardless of gender. So again, for parent, let's say the parent of the student are married, or they live together and they were never married. Both parents do go on that FAFSA form. If the parent is divorced, single, and not married and not living with the student's other parent, then only one parent goes on the FAFSA form. And you would determine which parent that is based on which parent provides the most support for that student. So sometimes it's, students say, well, or parents say, we have shared custody. It's about equal. Who pays the student's possible health insurance, or where is the student going to reside mostly, like on breaks and holidays. So the FAFSA doesn't necessarily say it needs to be the parent that claims the student on their tax return, because we know that situation changed from year to year in some scenarios. So again, that's up to that family and that family unit to determine which parent provides the most support. If it's about equal, then that family unit needs to make that determination about which parent. So again, if the parents are not married, and they don't live together or were never married, then you would need to choose that parent in their unit. So let's say it's dad, and dad is remarried and has a spouse and there's children. So it's dad and his family and those children and the student are all listed on the FAFSA form. So if you have additional questions about that, again, you can contact the University of Akron's financial aid office, or the institution that you're looking at, financial aid office, and we can kind of help walk you through that process. FAFSA does also have resources, 1-800-4-FED-AID, that you can give a call to, and they can also help you with helping you with that determination. But generally, the financial aid offices are a little bit more equipped and have less customers and consumers to be able to help you answer those questions. Again, if your parent is unavailable, let's say because of incarceration, there's legal issues, maybe there's other, custody arrangements, things like that, contact the financial aid office and they can help do an appeal. Special circumstances, you would need third-party documentation, so that is police reports or things of that nature, but we certainly can help you with that. Under no circumstance should someone else besides a parent, biological or adoptive, be placed on the FAFSA form. So grandparents, aunts, uncles, family, friends who are supporting that student, again, unless the student was adopted by that person or biologically theirs, then they should not be listed on that FAFSA form. So again, how do you start the application? So both the parent and the student do need an FSA ID. You're going to create an ID and a password if you don't already have one, and hold on to this because you're going to use this for the next several years. So each year, again, you're doing the FAFSA form, and each year you're going to go ahead and use this FSA ID. So you're going to complete the 23-24 FAFSA, which uses 21 tax information. So basically, it's going to ask for income information. So that's 1099s, W-2s, 1040s, any kind of tax information for that year for both the student and the parent. So it could be that the student didn't work that year. So again, then you would put in zeros. The thought process is because it could be technically a year or two back. So that because no matter when you do the FAFSA form, hopefully you have that tax return completed. So be sure you actually use the tax information from the year that it's requesting. You would also need asset information, so current bank account, non-retirement, things of that nature, but it does detail in the FAFSA form what documentation and what they're asking for you to complete. So some things that we see that are common errors and that we just want to make sure that you are aware of. One is, on the FSAID side sometimes, or complete the FAFSA, or be sure that you use the correct Social Security number. So I know sometimes as a person who handles multiple accounts, so I have mine, my son's, different family members sometimes I'm helping with, numbers are similar and it kind of get mixed up. So be sure this is not the time to say, oh, I think I know it. Pull out the paperwork and actually use that correct number. Because that will truly hold up the process. It won't get to the institution. You put all that work into it and it'll just sit there because it can't line up, because the Social Security Administration does line up the Social Security number with the name, at least the first letters, first few letters of the first name and last name. And again, with the name, making sure that's correct. So if everyone calls you Bonnie, but your name is actually Susan, making sure that you're using your full legal name that's on your Social Security card is very key for both parents and students. Also, making sure that if possible, use what's called the IRS data retrieval tool. This is where the IRS, you actually import your tax information from the IRS right onto the FAFSA form. So this helps to cut down on errors, not adding an extra zero, that type of thing, not having to know the difference between taxes paid and your AGI. So again, if you're able to use the IRS data retrieval tool, be sure to use that. I do like to go over what if your situation has changed, right? So because we use tax information from a few years ago, if your current situation is different, then they do allow for a special circumstance appeal form. So it's very important that you actually use the tax information that is requested, right? And then do the appeal or adjustment with the school's financial aid office. So let's say there's a divorce, a separation. Let's say, unfortunately, a parent just dies and is now deceased. Maybe you've taken in family members because you're helping to care for people. And this can happen anytime during the academic year. So some families know early on that my situation looks nothing like the tax information that you requested. But let's say in the middle of the academic year, once your student is actually in college, there's a change. Again, contact the financial aid office. We can take a look at it to see if that is something that is considered, a financial change, and it has to be a significant financial change, and that could alter some of the aid that you're actually eligible for. So again, you would need to contact the individual financial aid offices that you plan to apply, or you have applied to, or your student attends, to make those adjustments or changes. There are different types of aid. So once you do the FAFSA form, you are automatically applying for federal and your state, Ohio, most likely grants in different types of grants. So again, the Pell Grant is like a federal grant, so that again, based on the FAFSA information, they make that determination. So as soon as you submit it, to be honest, it says, congratulations, you are eligible for this amount if you are eligible. The state grant or supplemental grants sometimes come after that. There's also what's called a teach grant, and that is for students who are looking to go into teaching. There are certain criteria with that. Different institutions process that slightly different. So that is another federal grant opportunities. Federal work study is also an opportunity where students can get an on or off campus job. Normally, that's to our students who are Pell Grant eligible, but it really depends on that institution, who they determine that. One way to be considered for it is to check on the FAFSA form that you want to be considered for work study. Even if your student isn't eligible for work study, generally there are tons of positions on campus for students, and that's really a great way for them to be connected. have some extra pocket money, you know, for those incidentals and personal expenses as well. So student employment really at a modest rate shows that it really helps students to be successful. State aid, I kind of talked a bit about this though. So for Ohio's Ohio College Opportunity Grant, there's also different War Friend scholarships in the Ohio Safety Officers College Memorial Fund. If you think your student might be eligible for either one of those top two there, be sure you go on ohiohighered.org site and making sure you know the parameters for those awards and that your student's information is listed correctly. So scholarships is something that you should be looking for throughout your student's career in college. There are tons of areas to look at, in your local community. Hopefully your guidance counselor provides something for you. Usually they have some type of website, they have some type of listservs to tell you about community local scholarships. Think about professional organizations. So let's say your student wants to be a nurse. So think about nursing professions who want to give back to their community, increase the number of nurses. So they tend to offer different types of scholarships for those students, fraternal organizations, Masonic organizations, VFWs, Kiwanis clubs, places like that. Again, tend to offer different types of scholarship opportunities. You don't necessarily have to be a member of those organizations. You don't even necessarily have to know anyone who is in those organizations. To apply for those scholarships. That's part of how they give back to the community, is in forms of scholarships. If you have a place of worship, again, they offer some types of scholarship opportunities, so definitely check into them. I say parent and or student employers. So sometimes as part of their human resource or benefits package, they have scholarship opportunities. I've even seen grandparents employers, even if they're retired. So not only their descendants, but their descendants sometimes can apply for different scholarship opportunities. Of course, ethnic and cultural background scholarships are available. And also there's many students who do look at military, so ROTC, Ohio National Guard, for scholarship opportunities to help with funding education. There are public websites that you can go to look for different scholarships. Just be careful about sharing your personal information. One key thing is to making sure that you submit what you need, what they're requesting. Many times they will ask for a copy of what's called the student aid report, which is basically the printout from the FAFSA form. So many scholarships will ask for that, and it's not necessarily to determine, they have some type of need analysis, and need is very different for different students. So need could be, the cost of attendance is $30,000. The student has $10,000 in aid, and their expected family contribution is $5,000. So they still have need of another $10,000 or $15,000. So really, I would say apply, and let that entity determine if you are eligible or not. Especially if you think you meet most of the criteria, but you're not sure about the need component, be sure that you're, submitting that information and applying. So just again, be careful of submitting your personal information. If you have questions about it, maybe if you can go, ask some questions, make sure that they're not sharing that information. Also, when you complete the FAFSA form, every student is eligible for a federal student loan in their name. Some are interest-free, some are low interest. The current rates for this academic year, so of course it's going to change by the time that your student is enrolled, but just to kind of give you an idea, the current interest rate is 4.99% for student loans. The nice thing about the federal student loans is that there's like no prepayment penalty, anything like that, and the student can defer the payments until 6 months after they stop going to school or graduate. So again, sometimes that's really just helping to have an alternative source or making up a small gap if that's needed. So families sometimes say, well, why can't the student borrow the full amount in their name? There are limits to how much the student can have every academic year. So generally as a freshman student, they can get up to $5,500, of which $3,500 can be and subsidized, but that school will determine exactly how much and what breakdown of subsidized, meaning interest-free, and unsubsidize the student gains. So again, by doing the FAFSA form, we're going to automatically offer it to you, but that doesn't mean you have to accept it. Again, it's kind of a choice. And again, sometimes we don't know what you already are coming with. So we don't know about those outside Kiwanis Club scholarships or whatever you have. So we're trying to give you as much information so that you and your family can make the decision of what's the right decision for you. If there is an additional gap, the parent will be offered what's called a parent loan. This is a loan in the parent's name. The parent is responsible for paying that back. The parent can go up to the cost of attendance, so really there's not as much of a limit as how much is covered. The parent can defer those payments while that student is in school almost the end of their career. This is credit-based, so if for some reason the parent is denied, the parent can seek a credit-worthy endorser, or they can have the student considered for an additional loan in their name. And in some cases, that works best for the student. But again, this is a family decision about what works best for you and your family. So generally, the school compiles all this information about what they know. So again, once you do the FAFSA form and apply to that school, generally, so it depends on when that institution is able to process it. So since FAFSA comes out October 1, some have deadlines of November 15th, December 1st. Akron's priority deadline is December 1. So you do want to look and see your schools of choice, what their priority deadline is. That doesn't mean that they won't accept the FAFSA after that, but there's certain limited funds that they only consider and award to students who make that priority deadline. So you definitely want to do the FAFSA earlier versus later. So if you're able to do it, as soon as it comes out in October or early November, go ahead and get that done. So that's one less thing that you have to worry about doing. So once you do that FAFSA form, it's sent to the school, they process it. The University of Akron usually brings those in over like the holiday break, and we start processing them. It depends on when each school usually has their own timeline, and they can tell you when they're going to send out offer notifications. Depending upon the institution is how they deliver that offer notification. Some do an email to the school, to the student. Some mail it in the U.S. mail, generally made out to that student for them to review. And you're going to get offer notifications from each individual school. So it's really important that you can compare and contrast that information on there. It's going to summarize the estimated cost of attendance. So again, that tuition, that housing, the books and supplies, all those expenses. Then it's going to summarize all the aid. So it's going to hopefully tell you what each thing is. If it's a scholarship from the institution, such as our presidential, if it's a grant from the federal government, such as the Pell Grant, it's going to tell you each one of those and how much you're getting each term, quarter, semester, and what's the total for the academic year. Then it's going to also list any kind of loan options as well. And again, for some of these, you have to take other steps. So again, they're not going to automatically give you loans. They're going to have you apply for those and do other things. And they'll also tell you if you have to accept it, whether you have to send a thank you letter or whatever to the donor for the scholarship. They're going to give you that information. Like an honors scholarship, do you have to be a part of the honors college? Things of that nature. So that will be generally detailed in that offer notification. Just to kind of think about, as you're getting different offer letters, they're going to look slightly different from institution to institution. And so what I usually tell families is let the process work, right? So go ahead and apply for as many scholarships as you can, apply for different the schools, list those all on the FAFSA form, and then you're able to get that offer notification and make that decision. So maybe, it seems like a school that might be a bit out of reach because of the cost, but sometimes they'll see that information and offer you different types of scholarships. Many schools want a diverse population. So let's say you're from a county, an Appalachian county or a county that doesn't, have certain occupations. There are times where the schools will recognize that and will have scholarships earmarked just for that area. And that's why it's always also important to particularly apply for the scholarships that your guidance counselor gives you. Again, many of those are very specific to your area. So your county, your municipality, your school. So again, those are ones that you would really want to apply for because it's a smaller pool and they really want to help the people in their local community. So as you're looking at different costs of colleges, you're going to see a difference. So public, a private institution is going to be higher than a public institution because they don't have the same funding from the state. And even community colleges even have additional funding because they have local funding from the county. So those numbers should not be the sole reason why you're determining, if possible, especially making sure it's the right fit. But if you let the financial aid process work, a lot of times that helps to level the playing field. So again, making sure that one, you have a right fit, a school that matches, maybe your values and that you'll feel comfortable and safe in, and that has your major and that, has a population range that is comfortable for you. Even looking at how close or far it is from home, if that is something that's significant to you, but making sure that you basically try to let the financial aid process work. So what about books and supplies? So after you get the bill, yeah, you still have to do books and supplies. So making sure again that not only those bill costs that you are making sure that you are meeting, but those other indirect costs that come up. So those textbooks where your student has to possibly go to the bookstore and pick those up and pay for those separately. An instrument or a tool that's needed that they didn't get in the beginning, but is needed mid-semester or term. So making sure that you have something left over to help with those other expenses. How do you finance out-of-pocket costs? So such as, let's say, you didn't quite have enough to cover all the tuition and residence hall fees. How do you finance that? Some students do use like a payment plan. Sometimes parents do a parent loan. Let's say you have a 529 plan. Most institutions have some type of payment plan where they break the balance up into 2, 3, or 4 payments. So again, they normally offer that information to you around closer to the start of the term, because sometimes you don't know about local scholarships until the end of your high school senior year. So you can always apply for private loans through outside institutions such as banks. If a credit union, you can apply for loans through that, but also continue to apply for local and national scholarships, because that really is sometimes the key. Many of our students do bring in scholarships with them, and they couple those with the ones that the institution had offer them to kind of make it all more affordable or easier to manage that expense of college. So remember that the FAFSA is free, the free application for federal student aid. There are some sites that will pay to assist, they will charge you to assist, but the application is actually free. Be sure that you're reading the letters that are sent to you from the financial aid office, because we might require documentation, we might have questions about something, and if we are asking questions, that will hold up the offer notification. So again, if we're sending you forms, be sure to send them back. Even if you're not sure you're going to attend that school, go ahead and complete that process so that you can have that offer letter, so that you can make the best informed decision for you. If you have questions, contact the financial aid office. Hey, this looks a little different. I have a question about this. I was expecting this. What does this mean? Is this a scholarship or a loan? Be sure you can certainly ask that question. And I usually say this: Parents, involve your student. So sometimes as a parent, want to kind of get stuff done and get it done quickly, but it's important that your students are in part of the process because they're the ones on the campus and they're the ones that's going to walk into the office with the question. And sometimes like, well, my mom sent me here. Well, what's your question, or what did she need? I'm not sure. So again, involve them in that process. And students, involve your parents, because students, you're the one who's going to get the notification. You're going to get the email, the text message, the letter in your name, and be sure you're sharing that information. I used to tell my son, I'd rather know twice than not at all. So don't assume that parents are copied on what the student is sent, because it's the student's account. So many of the communication is going to go directly to the student, which is a little bit different than the past when the student was in high school. You know, it would go to the parent, but now it's the student's account, it's going to go to the student. So just make sure that both parties are aware of what's going on. I talk about the financing pie. So we've talked a lot about different resources, right? We've talked about applying for scholarships. We've talked about once you do the FAFSA form, you're applying for federal grants and state grants and federal and state loans and all that stuff. The other part of the financing pie, and it's important that the family has this conversation, is, you know, what's the expectation as far as savings, whether there's a 529, whether it's that the student works over the holidays and breaks and saves their money to help pay for their room and board or their tuition or their books. What is everyone's responsibility? It doesn't mean that it's bad or good or a concern, but you want to have the expectation up front. So if the expectation is that the student covers tuition by applying for scholarships, whether it through the institution or their local area, and the parent covers the housing, or, you know, parent has 529 or they have savings, again, have that conversation early so that the student knows the expectation, whether they have to work over the summer and save $2,000 to, you know, cover that cost. So it might mean a difference of that student not going on, you know, a trip, you know, and spending those funds from that summer job. So again, having that conversation of what the expectation is, who's covering what, because many times the beginning of the semester, I have the parent and student in my office, and they're looking at each other thinking that the other person took care of it. So again, having that open dialogue now early on so that everyone is working towards that same common goal. So hopefully you found this presentation helpful, informative. As you are going through this process, there's plenty of people around to help and assist you. If you have questions, certainly your academic or guidance counselors can reach out to a member of the financial aid team at the University of Akron. Usually they have contacts and resources to help you, but hopefully, again, this presentation just kind of helped to give you guidance about what to look forward to. Again, my last tips are to apply for every scholarship you can. You know, some scholarships, they'll say they give priority to a student majoring in this, but if no one in that major applies, then they're able sometimes to have leeway of applying it to another major or denomination or set of students. So kind of make sure you're reading that, asking questions, applying on time, do the FAFSA form as close to October 1st as you can. Making sure you're applying and following up if there's documentation needed from that institution, whether it's admissions related, whether it's major related, whether it's financial aid related, making sure that you are submitting that documentation. Again, we thank you for your time. Again, if you have individual questions, the financial aid office is available. And again, good luck. Have a good rest of your year. You know, be sure that you stay up on your grades, because many institutions continue to look at your grades throughout your senior year and to continue to apply for scholarships, not just your new incoming freshman year, but throughout your career as a student. Again, have a good rest of your evening. Thank you for your time.